Hi, good morning. This is a video about Unit 1 FRQs concerning terms of trade. So terms of trade is another way of saying comparative and absolute advantage. Should two people specialize in a skill? And if so, what should they specialize in? And then also we can apply this to countries trading and specializing. An economist doesn't really care if you want to learn how to make both of these baked goods that we see in this question with donuts and cupcakes. An economist would say, if John is spending a lot of time learning both skills and so is Erica, then what we're losing is the possibility of a total production increase. And if John just did one thing and Erica did another, it might be less personally fulfilling. But if our goal is economic growth for this economy, what's going to give us the most goods? And the answer is specialization, deliberate practice, and making more of something because you've honed the skill. So whenever you get a table like this, unfortunately, I won't be giving you photocopies of these this year, but what you can do is you copy this over in a notebook, and then let's really break it down. So that way we can dissect the data a bit before we ever even get into some of this question. So I'm going to bounce over here to my document camera window. And what I've done over here is I've already put John and Erica into this little matrix here. And first of all, if ratios scream off the page for you, then fantastic, awesome. You're living under a star that I'm not living under. But what I would like students to know is that if you're not as comfortable with ratios, I'm going to show you two ways that you can answer this question. And the first way is sort of the process that you should all go under. And then the second way is a way that Mr. Clifford has taught us, but I would recommend that you only use it to check your work. So let's go into the first way. The first thing is that you should put these two individuals or countries on what I call a level playing field. So a level playing field means when I look at this data right now, it's really hard to compare these two individuals evenly because the numbers are so different. So I passed middle school math, so I feel like I can reduce a fraction. So I think about if these were fractions, like 200 over 100 or 150 over 50, or if it was the other way around. So when I look at these, I see that I can sort of reduce this down. And this is really 2 to 1. And Erica is really 3 to 1. Okay, so if you think about 200 to 100 is the same as 2 to 1. And Erica, 150 to 50, 50 out of 150 is 1/3. But in this case, I'm doing 3 to 1 because I want to follow the order that they're listed in the table. So one of the things that's interesting about these problems is that now that I've put them on a level playing field, I can have this conversation, okay? So here's the conversation that you have, okay? You act out a little if-then scenario. If John makes one cupcake, then he's not going to be able to make 2 donuts. So if he specializes in cupcakes, we're going to lose 2 donuts. That's the opportunity cost. If Erica makes one cupcake, then we're going to lose 3 donuts. And that's also an opportunity cost. And if you compare it with John, it's a bigger opportunity cost, right? So we don't want Erica to give up we don't want Erica to do the cupcakes, rather. I lost my train of thought. We don't want Erica to do the cupcakes because we're going to lose 3 donuts, okay? So we want as many donuts as possible. So what we're going to do is we're going to tell Erica, you're going to specialize in the donuts. And I'm going to use a different color here because if she doesn't specialize in the donuts, we're going to have fewer donuts as an economy, and we want the most possible, okay? I put a little CA there to say that she has a comparative advantage. When you look at her and John, he makes more donuts and he makes more cupcakes. But an economist would say, we have 2 people. You shouldn't waste one of these people. So one of them has to specialize in one thing. One of them has to specialize in the other. They have to divide and conquer, okay? So how do you determine who should do what? You have to have that conversation. Where is the opportunity cost greater? Okay? I got a little ad popping up over here on my screen, unsolicited. All right. Let's get rid of that. Okay. So now what are we going to do with John? Well, because Erica's going to specialize in the donuts, therefore John is going to specialize in the cupcakes. And I'm going to put a little CA there for comparative and absolute advantage. Okay. So that's one way to figure out who should do what. Another way is something that Mr. Clifford goes over in his video. And I assigned you his video to watch, or I will assign you his video to watch, depending on when you're watching this one. But it's worth another view if you've seen it already, now that we're doing questions like this. He recommends something where you cross multiply the numbers. Okay, so what you're going to do is you're going to follow this path. So I'm going to use yet another color. So if I cross multiply the numbers, 1 times 3 equals 3. I'll write that again in case you didn't know how I got there. Again, I went diagonally across. 1 times 3 equals 3. And now I'm going to go this way. 2 times 1 equals 2. So because this is what we call an output question, meaning that we're talking about the total output that John and Erica make in one day, we're not talking about how long it took them to make a donut. We're talking about how many donuts they made after a day. We are looking for which diagonal path has a larger number, okay? So when I go 1 times 3 equals 3, 2 times 1 equals 2, I see that 3 is the larger number, which means this diagonal path on our chart is who has the comparative advantage, okay? So that, I say check your work that way. And I say don't use that as your primary way because of something that's happening in this question. Common question that students ask is, can I do that same cross multiplication with the original sets of numbers? So if you go back and look at the black numbers that I had written, yes, you could do that too. So if you think 200 times 50, okay, that's going to be 1,000, right? And then, no, 10,000. And then when you take 100 times 150, that's going to be 15,000. So 15,000 is the larger number. So you could use the original numbers, but for my own sanity, I just like using smaller numbers because I'm going to miss a zero or I'm fearful I could do it wrong. Okay, so for me personally, I like using the reduced numbers, but again, that's a personal choice. Okay, so the last bit of information that you're often asked about is something called absolute advantage. So I'm going to give you an example. LeBron James. LeBron James is in no doubt a very fit, athletic, strong, dedicated, skillfully trained, hardworking individual. And that's what makes him one of the best basketball players, if not the best basketball player of all time. But there's something that makes him better at basketball than me. And it has nothing to do with any of those things. It has to do with the fact that he's super tall. So I could be really good at basketball too. And in fact, I played basketball when I was a kid growing up. But I'm just never going to dunk a basketball. I'm 5'3", and I might be 5'4" on a good day. And I know that other people who are my height have been able to dunk a basketball before, but they're an anomaly. So most of us that sit around 5'3", like we're not dunking basketballs. The reason why LeBron James would have an absolute advantage over me in, let's say, dunking is just due to his height. Like there's something about him that gives him the ability to just be better at that. And that's okay. And an economist would say, we can't all be good at everything, and that's all right because there's so many things the economy needs. The economy needs him to play basketball, and the economy needs me to teach high school, and that's okay. So same thing with John and Erica. When you look at John, he's doing donuts and cupcakes better than Erica on this chart. But you've got Erica there. You can't waste her. You can't be like, all right, well, Miller, you can't play professional basketball, so why don't you just sit in a hut and waste away? I have to find something, okay? So Erica needs to do something. So Erica is going to specialize. But the data here shows that John is better at both. An absolute advantage is just a fancy way of saying, who produces more? Who does this better, okay? So John has an absolute advantage in donuts, and he also has an absolute advantage in cupcakes. So notice how before I ever look at this question, I am dissecting the data. I'm finding out who has an absolute advantage, who has a comparative advantage. Comparative advantage is also another fancy way of who should specialize in what, okay? So let's look at this question and let's figure out what the answers are, right? So we've already determined who has an absolute advantage in producing donuts. John, because he produces more donuts at the end of the day. That's your explanation, okay? Who has a comparative advantage in producing donuts? Interestingly enough, Erica does. You don't always have the comparative advantages align with who is making the particular, or sorry, who has the particular absolute advantage. The other thing is that sometimes no party has an absolute advantage. What if John and Erica both made 200 cupcakes? Sorry, 200 donuts. Neither one would have an absolute advantage. So you should be ready for scenarios like that too. And there are some out there that we'll take a look at, whether it's things on your Connect or a question we'll do in class or a question on AP Classroom. So there are examples out there. Pay attention to them. They do come up, okay? The comparative advantage is Erica because the opportunity cost would be greatest if she gave up producing donuts. You also could say that the opportunity cost for John is lower if he produces cupcakes. So as long as you're using the phrase opportunity cost in your answer, you could frame it in terms of Erica making the donuts or in support of John making cupcakes, so therefore she should do the donuts. Now, part C is why I say you shouldn't only do the cross multiplication method. Because sometimes you are asked to an if-then scenario, a hypothetical, that's different than what you see on the paper. So it says, assume John and Erica decide to specialize according to their comparative advantages, right? So they're going to specialize as opposed to doing this on their own, okay? And suppose a fairy godmother comes down and says, you're going to do 1 cupcake exchanged for 4 donuts. The way this is worded is tricky because in the graph or in the graphic at the top, they have the donuts listed first and then the cupcakes. And now the question is putting the cupcakes first and the donuts. So just be careful how you list this information. So now I'm going to go back to the document camera. Okay. So the fairy is coming down and saying, no, what if you guys did this? What if you and John and Erica did 4 donuts to 1 cupcake? Would you take that deal instead of this 3-to-1 thing that you're doing? So Erica takes a look at it and says, all right, well, when we specialize in trade, I make 3 donuts. John makes a cupcake. So I export 3 donuts and I get to import a cupcake for that. John says, well, in our deal right now, I'm making 1 cupcake. And when I make 1, I get 3 donuts from Erica. So Erica looks at this and she says, well, now I have to make 4 cupcakes to get, 4 donuts to get the same return that I was just doing for 3? That's not beneficial to Erica. She does not want to do this. No way. Erica doesn't want to do this because she has to put more effort in to get the same return. No one likes doing that. That doesn't make sense. So Erica would say to this fairy who came down with this mystical deal, no, thank you. I'm doing well on my own, specializing in this. John, on the other hand, looks at this deal and says, so I still get to make 1 cupcake, and I'm going to get 4 donuts instead of 3? And I put in the same amount of effort. John says yes. John looks at this deal and says, oh yeah, this benefits me. I want to do it. So that's how I figured this question out, is I just kind of had to look at it and say, this is what I'm making specialization, and this is what I get in return. Now let me look at the proposed deal. The proposed deal is not better for Erica. She has to work harder to get the same. He has to work the same, and he gets more. There's that ad again. Okay. So notice how they're asking whether or not it's beneficial. Look at the wording closely. There's no explanation required. Notice how in part A and B it says explain at the top. It doesn't say that with part C. So you have a 50-50 shot of getting this right. And by the way, it could be beneficial to both. It might not be beneficial to both in a question. In this case, it's beneficial to John. It's not beneficial to Erica. Okay? The next part is students had to make a production possibilities curve. And I'm going to start drawing this here. This production possibilities curve is for Erica. And it uses the word horizontal axis, and we have to label this accordingly. Hopefully you know that horizontal means like this, okay? Vertical lines go up and down. And it says, she discovers new production techniques. So that's code for new technology, right? New capital. That's going to increase her daily production of cupcakes only. Okay? So right now, she is making 50 cupcakes. I'm going to show you my PPC in a second, but I want to put the data on here. And she's making 150 donuts. I have no information to support whether this PPC should be bowed out or flat. So either is going to be acceptable. It doesn't have to be 100% to scale, but try your best. So this is Erica's production possibilities curve. We've got cupcakes on the y-axis, the vertical one, and then we've got donuts on the horizontal, or the X. It increases her production of cupcakes only. So she's still making 150 donuts. So what I want to do is I want to take this line. Oops, I'm going to make this a little bit taller so that looks a little nicer. And I'm going to show a little arrow just to indicate what the original and what the new line is. They didn't ask me to put a number here. They didn't ask me to label one line like A and the next line B or anything like that. But what you should show, and I tried my best, let me focus this a tiny bit. I tried my best to make this line flat. It didn't quite get flat. I didn't use a ruler or anything. So this should still be at the same point, and all we should do is just see that bumped up a little to show the increase in cupcakes only. So that's the John and Erica question for 2016. I know this video was a little bit longer than I intended, but I really wanted to go through this question slowly and carefully because it's the first question that you may have ever done with the comparative and absolute advantage, and I want to make sure that if you're utilizing this video because you need extra help, that it was helpful to you and gave you some a little bit more of an in-depth explanation of the question. All right, comparative and absolute advantage questions, I find that people either feel comfortable with immediately or they feel icky about them immediately. When I started doing economics in 2004 with questions like this, they made me feel very uncomfortable. And it's taken me a lot of practice and a lot of tricks. And I tried to show you those tricks right now so that you don't have to sort of go through the process. I can give you a little head start to get there to being comfortable. All right, that's it. John and Erica, 2016 exam.